Since my first upload, I've always tried to cover pieces of media that had enough of a following to spark some meaningful discussions, but wasn't so popular that I run the risk of repeating what others have said before me. With that in mind, there are 3 projects that I've been hoping to cover since last year. The first of which I knew I would only produce when I had reached at least 100 subscribers. With that many people interested in my content, I could all but guarantee that what I'm going to say about this topic will actually draw the attention of those already familiar with it, and create interest for those who aren't. What became a challenge for the creation of this video was keeping track of the various representations of real-world mythology this series takes from, as it tends to present them in ways that aren't typically seen, yet they do keep in mind the rules and history that comes with these legendary figures and spiritual systems. Overcoming that conundrum, I was able to focus on what I found to be particularly interesting about this series as it divides the attention given to the plot, lore, and characters in a way that ends up exploring its ideas in a manner that would offrise en sakel expel and ebsubdifici jvc palful.
Huh. I figured that would last longer. Anyway, I'm covering the Index series. Allegedly, when science and magic collide, a story is born, and said story is what I plan to look at for this video by going over the 3 seasons related to this particular branch of the franchise. If anyone's curious whether or not I'll be touching upon the spin-off series, I feel like I already answered that question. Now, instead, if you're wondering, do I plan on covering those spin-offs anytime in the near future? At the moment, my answer is no. Now, if you wish to assume I'm a consummate professional who has well-founded reasons for analyzing the media that appears on this channel, then the more informative answer would be that said spin-offs neither undermine nor benefit the point I'm trying to get across for this special, so dedicating any amount of time to those shows would do nothing more than pad the video out. If you instead wish to assume I'm a charlatan who has shallow reasoning behind the videos I make, then instead I want you to think about the fact that I've spent 47 hours looking at these colorful kids and the adventures they've been up to, and that's not even including editing. So I also won't be going episode by episode or doing the broad series review. Now, in keeping in the spirit of some of the smarter characters in this franchise, I won't reveal my main motivation at the moment and instead cryptically allude to it throughout this video. But if you're looking for an immediate answer, going episode by episode runs the risk of me repeating the same point several times within a minute, and doing a general series review could very well lead me to skipping over some interesting points within the season. Instead, I'll be jumping from storyline to storyline, bringing up the quality of the writing, be it the good, the bad, the amusing, or the queer. I also wish to briefly apologize for getting the video out so much later than I intended it to, but I only discovered the Index series recently and I felt like I needed to take the time to familiarize myself with it to make sure I don't misrepresent any of the points that I bring up.
But during your Valentine's video you implied that this was a series yo.
Starting off the story, we're introduced to Academy City, the place where the multiple advancements in various scientific fields govern some of its citizens, its supposed purpose for existing, and how our initial protagonist boy Toma relates to it, be it through his strange abilities that are rather peculiar even by this city standards, or his willingness to briefly take in what looks to be a child nun, a decision that puts both of their lives in danger, but in ways that wouldn't immediately be obvious. What initially caught my eye in regards to this series was the way it played with audiences' familiarity concerning tropes. If you're a casual viewer who doesn't really keep track of different reoccurring writing elements that can be found in various pieces of fiction, you may for a brief moment believe the girl is the one who appears to be in danger. Whereas those who do make a habit of cataloging what can be considered tropes and cliches would recognize just how dangerous that girl likely is, and would patiently wait for her to demonstrate her powers so that her and the protagonist can be friends on proper terms. Only is Toma the one who recognizes just how dangerous the girl truly is, but his interference came from a desire to protect the teenagers from her. Then, red herring victim deciding to turn her aggression towards Toma for interfering in the first place, both resembling familiar story dynamics while not being beholden to how they're traditionally expected to play out. I am left wondering if the identities concerning the higher level espers is something Toma managed to figure out by himself, or whether or not that's public knowledge that the background characters apparently didn't know of. If it's the former, it's an interesting detail for his character. This says more about him as a person than his willingness to be chased around town in order to save, again, possible teenagers deciding to hit on what looks to clearly be a middle schooler. The latter seems more unlikely, since while it isn't uncommon for people to be oblivious when it comes to the appearance of certain popular figures, that tends to be less likely when said people are actually brought into a society rather than brought up in one. Adding on to that is the fact that this particular public figure tends to make herself known whenever she feels highly embarrassed. More importantly, it would just be an unnecessary detail to have in this scene, considering it's well within the reason of people to deliberately antagonize someone they know is dangerous purely because they believe they have enough support behind them. What's not particularly surprising or original is the type of humor this anime likes to fall back on. Like most anime I've seen aimed at a middle school to high school demographic, jokes in here seems to be more situational, whereas instead of making humorous situations rooted in the characters' personalities, the situations the characters find themselves in is supposed to be hilarious in and of itself. For instance, if you don't find yourself immediately chuckling at the thought of a teacher who looks like a kid but acts like an adult except for the moments where she decides to have childish responses, then what the rest of the show does in regards to its humor isn't likely to have you holding your sides. What really earned my interest was how the show decided to handle the main conflict of this story arc. Unlike the diner incident, the story does generally have a more strict adherence to the formula it uses for the main focus of the arc, as Toma comes across a strange person who gives him a small piece of information in regards to the setting at large. Said person is put in danger thanks in part to their association with the protagonist. Said protagonist stands up for that person, with the antagonist in question underestimating them. And the protagonist proves their worth by walking away
as the victor,
while showing there's more to them than meets the eye. This adds a new variable by having the victory very much depend on the location they're fighting in, as Toma takes advantage of the sprinkler system to... The story then decides to do an AP version of that formula by having the protagonist come across the partner of the previous antagonist and unquestionably lose them, just to show how much tougher this new threat is, while giving a sense to our protagonist as much to learn in regards to their own fighting capabilities. Where it takes a turn is that instead of having Toma go off somewhere, train, become demonstrably stronger, and then put up such a impressive fight that even if he doesn't win, he earns her respect and therefore earns the right to watch over Index. He just has to take his failure on the chin and instead try a different approach when it comes to a non-backslashing solution.
moreover, Toma learns that neither Sao or Kanzaki intended to hurt Index, as well as wishing they didn't have to erase her memory because they know doing so still ends up hurting her in some capacity. Instead, they're driven by the knowledge that Index memorizing a plethora of tomes she was required to, taking up too much of her memory, and now if she goes on living her life beyond a year and continues to memorize the experiences she has, she will eventually die. Now, I don't think you need to be a neurologist to start questioning the reasoning behind said motive. But then again, it took Toma nearly a day before he did start asking significant questions in regards to memory, so maybe I'm just a skeptical guy. On the opposite end of that spectrum, it's entirely believable that Style and Kanzaki would in fact blindly go along with the supposed logic behind why they're required to erase their memory. They do have a religious background after all, and a constant theme throughout many religions is the need to put the people you love on the line so long as you follow the faith of your higher power, with the presumption being you will be rewarded for sticking by said higher power. Once all three of them are on the same page in regards to the supposed necessity of Index having her memory erased being a farce, for lack of a better term, they all need to pull together their resources and limited knowledge on this subject in order to protect someone each of them cherishes. It takes a familiar storytelling formula and uses that to capture the audience's attention while gradually building towards a climax that feels more distinguished from how the story started initially. In doing so, it allows the story to demonstrate its own unique appeal that doesn't rely on the audience's familiarity with other pieces of media, while still showing the proper amount of respect for those tropes as well as understanding why they were utilized so frequently in the first place. This goes beyond the plot itself and can even extend to the individual interpretation of the character. For Toma, there's this question of if his desire to help Index purely stems from an altruistic need to help anyone he feels is in danger or suffering, or if it's instead motivated by guilt that comes from a past failure to help someone out in a similar situation. There's Style and Kanzaki, wherein it seems like the latter is far more concerned about her past relationship with Index and the suffering she's putting her through, but it could also be said that she's simply a bit more open about how she feels emotionally, and Style is in fact far closer to Index than Kanzaki ever was, and it's because of that fact that he has to pretend to be so indifferent and callous in the present to make what he has to do to her a more digestible action. Finally, there's Kanzaki, whose hesitation when dealing with Toma, as well as her, in some ways, needless exposition, could be seen as her seeing him as a kindred spirit and wanting to give him a level of grace she wasn't afforded when having to make this decision in regards to Index, or she could subconsciously want to be stopped and is constantly providing Toma opportunities to prove her, as well as the English church, wrong when it comes to how Index's memory erasure should be handled, or if it should be even implemented at all. None of this is explicitly said or shown, so even if someone finds themselves being unable to invest in those particular versions of the characters, then they could just as easily enjoy them as they are overtly presented within the plot as a whole. This could even be seen in the character's physical appearance, as it's pretty clear that Style and Kanzaki are several years older than Index, demonstrating that the relationship isn't just that of friends, but is instead likely of legal guardians who have to put someone who could be even seen as a surrogate daughter.
I can't believe you're doing this joke again.
18, really?
Actually, this is worse since people who are unfamiliar with the series won't even get why you did this bit.
14, really? Looks like I'll have to take that part out of the script. What else to focus on? How about the fact that Toma's right hand dispels magic or any other supernatural occurrences almost instantaneously, yet it took several seconds for Index's wardrobe to disperse into small pieces of fabric. Moving on to what I would say actually holds the arc back a bit is the somewhat clumsy way it delivers exposition. I'm not just referring to the traditional sense in which characters give out information without being prompted to, or not having clear motive as to why they're doing so. Instead, I'm more so directing that towards the arc having a skewed view of what information should be delivered, such as taking the time to explain the nickname and abilities of a character who isn't really relevant to this particular plot, yet refusing to go over how exactly a small girl with limited capabilities and resources managed to evade two people who are assigned to erase her memory at a specific interval, especially when this arc establishes that magicians have the capability of tracking mana, and Index's clothes practically radiate that source. Made even more confusing when it's also shown that at least one of them has the ability to transport people into what looks to be a reflective dimension. This lack of elaboration applies to Index's character as a whole, as it's never exactly made clear how she feels concerning this incident she finds herself forced into. Of course, on one hand, her constantly running away should be a clear indicator that she's not exactly thrilled to have her brain reset. My issue is that it's never made clear if she's just running out of necessity because she realizes she has no way of stopping those two, if she's actually utterly terrified of them and simply hides that fear under the guise of a joyful child, if she deeply hates both of them, yet is willing to swallow all of that if it means giving Toma a chance to live, or if she suspects that they might have a rational reason for why they continuously chase after her, but feels as if she can't ask them because she thinks the minute they come close to her, then she's going to be in grave danger. Some might think that because of those emotional states of being are never brought up, they clearly weren't what the story was trying to get across, or even that, as I said earlier, the fact that she's running away is all the understanding of her character we need. Yet it still is odd that we'll get such a strong understanding of three of the primary characters within this storyline, while Index, this focal point of the storyline, remains more or less an accessory to their stories. To balance out my criticisms, I will say that Index's personality that is on display is very enjoyable. She can act impetuously and without tact when interacting with other people, yet not only does that work given her supposed actual age, but also with the context that thanks to her constant memory erasure, emotional maturity is likely an aspect of her personality that's also been stunted.
That side of her personality is balanced out with her ability to act with grace and show concern with total strangers, giving off the impression that even if she doesn't fully remember the teachings of her church, she at the very least has a unwavering sense of what is right or wrong, read into her person regardless of what she actually remembers. On a more personal note, I am slightly disappointed with Toma's resolution when it comes to this storyline. Now, on one hand, I get the writer's desire to have protagonists who can have information explained to him without running the risk of having said information being details he should already know, or having to do a protagonist who's completely ignorant to the setting and therefore has to have pretty much every single aspect of it explained to him. And I even appreciate the thematic symmetry that comes with Toma no longer being aware of what he was like as a person, whereas Index, the amnesiac he was helping throughout this arc, at least has a better idea of the man, boy really, Toma used to be, as they now start a new life together and build a relationship from there. Oh yeah, if it wasn't clear from the images I was showing, by the end of this arc, Toma is now Index's caretaker as Style and Kanzaki go back to their other duties as members of the English Puritan Church. Back to what I was saying, my problem is that I was starting to get invested in pre-amnesia Toma, and I found his potential future storylines to be compelling if I am correct when it comes to my speculation about why he was so desperate to help Index. And while we may go back to that version of Toma sometime in the future, it seems unlikely it will be anytime in this series' near future. Still, I enjoyed my time with this arc. The next arc sees Toma called upon by Style through the recommendation of the chairman. Together they're tasked to find a girl with an unusual gift who is within the walls of Academy City under the supposed protection, but in reality utilization of an alchemist. I'd like to start off by saying that, unfortunately, this arc doesn't maintain the previous storyline's creative way it integrated familiar tropes within the plot itself. For this tale, we see Mario, Kamijo, and Luigi Magnus try to save the Princess of the Week. Why Toma himself is chosen is given questionable reasoning, but considering it's coming from a source that doesn't give off the impression of a straightforward man, it is likely he had a secondary reason for wanting Toma to assist Style on this mission that we're just not privy to. Speaking of straightforward, that's pretty much how this storyline plays out in terms of its plot. On its own, that would be an innocuous detail that has no bearing on the actual quality of the story itself, but when looking at stories that do manage to still be captivating, despite coming across as derivative in some areas, you'll typically find that the prospect of being both entertaining and predictable lies in the lead character's charming personality. While Toma still has interesting traits to his character, and Style could be argued as the best character in the entire franchise, charisma isn't really a trait I would attribute to either character, let alone describe it the strongest aspect of their personalities. So in practice, it instead feels like they're walking through this storyline as if it was a mundane errand, which it very well could be for Style. But that clearly should not be the case for Toma, thus making the tension in this arc feel rather weak. But this storyline isn't completely lacking in originality, as the enforcers of the Alchemist look to be entranced students, making this feel less like a dorm or a castle, but instead a cult. That potential angle isn't touched upon very much besides a few lines of dialogue, so really it's more of an interesting detail rather than a compelling facet of the story. Instead, the most original element of this arc is how the alchemist's powers are presented, as it doesn't really fall in line with any popular display, yet it very well could have basis in the real-world historical recounting of the craft. There's also a point of similarity found between the Mario code workers and the alchemist himself, as he was also once a caretaker of Index, with him setting up this operation in the hopes that he could also save Index's life in a way that doesn't force her to constantly get her memory erased after each year. I would find this comparison compelling to the point that I might even mention the Alchemist by name, if it was primarily between him and Style. I don't just mean because of their similarity of being magic users who are willing to go to drastic lengths to ensure Index's safety and happiness. There's also the shared trait of them initially coming across as dismissive and indifferent towards anyone ignorant of the magical world, only to quickly lose their composure if their prize is being challenged or they have failed to live up to their own goals they set for themselves. The difference being Styles' concern for Index's well-being marginally outweighs his own desire to see himself as the one who ensures her happy future. in stark contrast to the alchemist, who has a overreaction to learning that all his efforts were for naught. This could even be taken a step farther, as Styles, seeing the alchemist have such a volatile reaction to learning Toma already fixed the problem they were both worried over, consider as a wake-up call that is an unhealthy mindset. And while he certainly doesn't have to be Toma's friend, they can still be amicable towards each other. A quick moment where it's hinted at that Style may harbor romantic feelings for Index. I see her having enough positive qualities where someone will feel inclined to protect her. I can even understand your average middle schooler thinking she's cute and just wanting her as a girlfriend on the basis of that alone. But Style never came across as that immature in the case of the latter. And that him and Index share so little in common that I have a hard time buying he would attract to her personality in any capacity. Maybe it's supposed to be a case where he sees something in her that he lacks, thus making him feel as if they need to be together. But that's never really explored, and this hypothetical crush isn't really brought up again outside of this particular scene. Instead, the arc makes a rather minuscule comparison between the alchemist and Toma, which, considering one of them doesn't even recall the boy he used to be, nor has a strong grasp on who this new factory reset version of himself is, it comes across like the show overemphasizing a singular point of similarity rather than making any sort of interesting parallel between the two. Speaking of Index, she doesn't really do much with this story arc besides adopt a cat and get captured. The former being the only time the more gracious version of Index appears in these 3 episodes. For the rest of her screen time, we get someone who dry bags her ice cream, gets angry at someone when they're unable to get any, and being incensed when girls call pretty in front of her face, with the added bonus of her becoming competitive once said girl claims she's a magician. If you found her comedic moments to be enjoyable in the previous storyline, then you're likely to have a good time with her here. On my end, I find myself disappointed and hope that this was simply the result of her having a minimal amount of screen time. Looking at the character who does marginally better in that department is Himagami. As if this was a planned way for the two to foil each other when it came to their respective introductions, we do actually get a good look into how Himagami feels in regards to her powers and what effects that has on her life. What detracts her is the gag she's settled with, as her comedic quirk is deadpan humor, wherein she says something that would normally have copious amounts of emotion, but how she expresses it is with a vacant expression and a subdued tone. Her feelings are still well conveyed. I just feel like the said gag isn't doing her any favors in regards to us empathizing with her rather than just understanding her plight. Overall, this arc can be best summarized with a singular term: obligatory. It shouldn't really be skipped due to the future plot points this story sets up, and nothing in it is really poorly done. But it doesn't really serve as a good example for the strengths this series has to offer when it comes to storytelling. Also, apparently the English Church has the ability to change people's appearances. I could put that detail in an earlier part of this section of the breakdown, but again, the word for this arc is obligatory. For this arc, we're focusing on the Railgun Girl, as both Toma and the audience learn more about her life, as well as how other level 5 espers are used by the higher-ups within Academy City. For starters, they're a shady organization, not directly under any specific government branch. So what do you think they're using these children for? This is all pre-recorded, so I can't answer you in real time. It's clones. They're using her to make clones. Their use within the setting differs from how clones are normally capitalized on, as nothing is said about them making an army, even though they by all means have the numbers, nor about recreating the Railgun's capabilities to a T, only with them being perfectly obedient where she is not, so that they will follow every one of their orders. Second, if you have been paying attention from the start, then you likely don't know what a level 5 Esper even is, considering I've never taken the time to actually explain it. Well, since we're on the arc that primarily deals with them, I guess it would be beneficial to give a quick crash course. An Esper is a person who can manipulate specific aspects of reality so long as they do the proper calculations within their head. The abilities that come after said calculations places a person in one of 6 different categories. If a person has no or extremely limited abilities, then they'll be classified as a level 0 Esper. On the opposite end of that spectrum are the level 5 Espers, who not only have versatile abilities, but whose powers are so strong that they become practically indispensable to the governing figures of Academy City. Mostly on account that it becomes near impossible to actually dispense of them. What stands out the most to me about this particular storyline is how the series goes about painting
painting the railgun girl in a more sympathetic light. It does not recontextualize any of her outbursts or potential murders. It doesn't reveal any tragic event in her past meant to explain away why she acts the way she does. Instead, we're simply shown more aspects of her life, including some of the people she cares about. Granted, most of those people being cloned could speak to her own self-centered mindset, but we also have other examples of her caring about different people's well-being, so I think that aspect of the plot isn't meant to be read into. By the end of the arc, a person could very well still see her as a twisted little demon monkey, but you also get to see how that type of contorted hell primate can feel helpless, as well as how she can be used by the powers above her. I also appreciate how this arc avoids the more derivative path her character could have taken by not setting her up as a potential love interest in any capacity. I also have a singular scene that feels like it's taking a light jab of the lead and his lady bonding after a near-death experience. Doing this both shows an understanding that someone helping you in a dire situation doesn't always equate to romantic feelings emerging, as well as its position as far as Toma's allies go, as she shows clear respect for him as a person and appreciates what he's done for her, but also isn't stumbling over her words just to hide her affection or throwing tantrums because he's dedicating some of his attention to other girls, or even coming up with convoluted ways just to spend time together. And going back to the people above her, the individual who is relevant to this particular arc would be the level 1 rank 5. The top ranked level 5, Accelerator. Because the story decides to slowly unravel what's going on with Makoto and her clones, we don't have much time spent getting to know Accelerator. This isn't to the arc's detriment, as he's neither playing up as a sympathetic nor misguided villain, so what we do learn works well for the story that presented. His abilities are something I've rarely seen in science fiction, so I feel anyone watching the show is likely to welcome surprise once they see the capacity of vector manipulation. Thomas here, you know, giving speeches, learning dark secrets, punching people in the wow, I didn't realize he was that strong. This storyline does change up his routine by having him go back to his dorm with drinks he didn't want, as well as be friendly towards Makoto after she gave him drinks he didn't want. To be honest, I don't have much to say in regards to Toma when it comes to this storyline. Don't get me wrong, he's an important part throughout the arc. It's just that unlike the previous two, he doesn't exactly have a strong emotional incentive to get himself involved. The arc tries having Toma and Makoto form an amicable dynamic, but that clearly isn't the same as them being roommates. And unlike the initial arc, Toma's life itself isn't ever put in danger until he actively gets involved with the experiments in relation to the clones. So really, he's just interloping in the situation because...
Do I need a reason to want to help out a friend?
Which is true to point to his character, but it doesn't leave much in the way of compelling discourse in regards to how he interacts with the other two significant players of this particular story. That also leads into the conveniences scattered throughout this arc. There's the clones clearly being unable to divulge important information in regards to their own purpose for being, as well as details concerning the experiment, which makes sense given the fact that it is supposed to be a top secret project, yet they're still able to tell Toma a significant amount of information that leads him to seek out Makoto. This takes him to her dormitory, wherein there's nobody at the front desk, which seems rather suspicious, even if we remember that these are technically super-powered schoolgirls. Finally, when he does go to a room, he arrives slightly before the dorm advisor, meaning that he neither gets caught by her initially, and the roommate in question has enough time to hide him under Makoto's bed, where he finds documents fully explaining what the experiment is and why there needed to be clones in the first place. Even the plan he devises to put the project to an end has a few lapses in logic, such as Toma himself not being a normal level 0, as well as him being unaware of who else in the city knows that. Also, the fact that Makoto still visibly helps out within the fight, which should put Toma's victory into question even if it was a late arrival, as far as the scientists are concerned. Now, one or two coincidences would be a harmless detail to notice, and if this was a storyline that was more about expanding the setting of Academy City, I would just simply write this off as an awkward way to do so. The issue is that this is a storyline that heavily focuses on the character's own personal struggles. So it doesn't help with the investment when the characters are constantly being pushed forward by opportunities gifted to them from the plot, rather than simply being their own personalities driving the narrative to its logical conclusion. Most of these instances only require slight tweaking to where they still advance the plot, but utilize the established traits of each of these characters. For instance, having Toma convince one of the clones to go into Makoto's room to require one of the files. We already know he's capable of convincing people to go against their own mission objectives they've had for years, and having the clone do this wouldn't necessarily contradict their programming, since Toma doesn't have to specify that they grab the files specifically, just something of great importance to her that she's keeping hidden. You could even have her roommate already found the file but refuse to read it out of respect for her as a person, get still handed over to Toma, believing that she's in danger and wanting someone to help her, but refusing to directly do so herself, as she thinks that would go against her friend's wishes.
Finally, there's the clones, which have a storyline that is reminiscent of traditional depictions of this plot point, with the whole, oh, my life's disposable and easily replaceable, you shouldn't care about me. Here, that's given more impact by the revelation that their purpose seems to be to give Accelerator the training he needs to move past his current limitations as a level 5. Like with Himigami before them, the clones are placed within the deadpan archetype, and as I said before with the unintentional vampire killing teenager, doing this does take away from some of the gravitas that comes from the turmoil they're going through. There is a partial in-universe explanation that suggests that this is a trait of theirs that they can move past, which opens up the door to different opportunities in regards to their personality, which seems very likely given that Toma managed to stop Accelerator, the experiment, and give the clones the potential to live better lives. Also, I almost forgot to mention during the last arc, when the Alchemist and Toma were exchanging attacks and blocks, the latter managed to cut off Toma's arm to prevent him from neutralizing any of the items he summoned into reality. Doing so caused a spiritual purple dragon to shoot out of Toma's severed arm socket and proceed to both terrify and attack the Alchemist. On one hand, I probably should have mentioned this sooner, such as when I was discussing that storyline, but on the other, my familiarity with anime targeted towards middle school and high schoolers made this an innocuous detail for me. What that says about the future of the series and how it develops is something I'll let you decide amongst yourselves. For this arc, it seems as if one who's just generally interested in learning more about the setting of Academy City, along with the different espers, then it'll be something that you'll find fairly enjoyable with next to no problems. But when looking at it from a general storytelling perspective, the barrage of coincidences does hamper the quality of the plot. Still, the story doesn't just offer new information, as it presents a visual demonstration of power in the initial arc and turned it into a crucial plot point for this one, showing that the series is able to take events happening both in the world of science and magic and use them to greatly inform one another.
Following that event, Toma finds himself taking a brief vacation from Academy City, as he is surprised by his parents being close by in the area, with them wanting to pay him a quick visit. He's surprised that their visit turns into shock and disgust once he sets his eyes on both his mom and cousin. All of that is a strong sense of concern once you learn why his family, is what else he sets his eyes on, has such a bizarre appearance, and how it's tied to a magical phenomenon that, if not stopped, could threaten not only the earth, but the heavens above it. I hope the writing landscape in the 2020s has gone to the point where people will no longer feel that it is a good idea to have the protagonist, who knows they're in a world with supernatural beings, still play the part of oblivious everyman for the sake of a joke. At bare minimum, I ask that any writer who already decided to implement that concept into their story will at least have the restraint to only do the joke twice. Across as padding to fill in time that the writers had no idea how to utilize in a more efficient manner, and at worst comes across like the character is moronic and feels as if the author has no respect for the audience's deductive reasoning. That isn't to say that Toma should have immediately guessed something magical afoot was occurring once he saw his mom and his cousin. But the sight of his classmate would have had to dig up information in regards to where Toma was going and when, have a large robe made for him, deliberately avoid Toma all through last night, and make sure he had awakened before Index did, just to just be some sort of joke, should tell Toma that this more than likely isn't the act of family and friends with a sick sense of humor, and instead something potentially more nefarious. For this to be the first time Toma actually leaves Academy City, The tone of this storyline is surprisingly jovial. There is still tension when it comes to figuring out who casted the Angel Fall spell, but it's not treated as an intriguing mystery, some sort of grand adventure, with Toma facing challenges he's never had to deal with before. Instead, one of the main effects of this spell is used simply for multiple body swap gags, or to be more accurate, a period swap, which avoids having the characters need to figure out how to use their abilities, nor does it lead to the major figures of this arc having to somehow hide who they really are by pretending to be someone they hardly know. What feels like an oversight is the fact that this type of plot was done so early in the series run. Normally, body technically appearance swaps are done with characters who have established personalities. Here, we see swaps between characters we do know well, but also characters we're meeting for the first time. Doing this lessens the contrast between their appearance and their attitude, since, for instance, while I can clearly look at Toma's mom and say that she's acting in ways Index never has, I don't know her well enough to get a good feel of what she's like as a person beyond generic mother figure. And me spending time learning about her as a person detracts from being able to, find amusement in how much she is acting nothing like Index. It's comparable to taking a personal survey during a stand-up routine. Despite this, the arc still manages to have some fairly funny jokes. Case in point, seeing Index cower in fear, with her aggression towards Toma immediately dissipating once he actually starts acting volatile towards her himself. In terms of serious revelations, we do learn more about Kanzaki's background, such as her being a saint, which, in the context of this series, gives her strength comparable to that of Jesus. Okay, so I don't know if this is simply amateur subbing, slight foreshadowing, or even just bizarre censoring, but they seem to want to avoid using the actual name Jesus anytime they mention the Son of God. Back to Sing Samurai, it is suggested that her own good fortune comes with its own set of problems, and thankfully the story never tries suggesting that makes her life equally, if not worse, than someone with bad fortune. Looking at such a person, for the first time in 9 episodes, Toma's amnesia isn't treated like a passing concern, or just used in the opening exposition for these, but instead is tied into the main plot of this arc, with his family's altered appearance making it hard for Toma to really get a strong read on who any of his loved ones actually are like as people. While the previous arc was affected by minor consequences that originated from the first storyline, this arc narratively parallels the second storyline for the series, as Toma has to team up with one of Index's handlers who still doesn't have much of a high opinion of him despite his helping them before. But unlike Style, Kanzaki didn't seem to have nearly as much of a personal problem with Toma, instead judging him simply because of his supposed and legitimate ignorance when it came to what Index's struggle was. So that she still has some hostility here, while not out of character, doesn't feel nearly as substantial. The other half of it is that we just simply don't see them interact as much as Style and Toma did in their shared arc. So even if you choose to put away your popcorn and instead take out the microscope, what you'll find in the more inconspicuous details of the storyline isn't that noteworthy. Instead, most of her interactions come from her new partner for this, which I imagine she received from a writing perspective, because her and Styles' similar temperament didn't lead to particularly interesting on-screen chemistry. Said partner being if you've actually been watching the video instead of just listening to it, you've likely seen this character pop up from time to time. This arc reveals that said character, a classmate, is in fact a spy working for the English Puritan Church. Yes, I know that technically speaking, the branch of the church that he as well as Style and Kanzaki work for is called Necessarius. I'm just calling the English Puritan Church because the phrase fan or newcomer is likely to understand. After learning this information, Toma is taken aback, shocked, and taking until night to fully process what he just heard. After which he goes on as if this was just a fun piece of trivia concerning his friend's background. To be clear, even if he still had all of his memories intact, I doubt a teenager would be heartbroken over his high school friend turning out to be someone he never really knew in the first place. The issue is that this reveal, at bare minimum, comes with the implication that everything Tsuchimikado has told Toma, and will tell Toma, is a lie that he's created for the purpose of his mission. And in the worst case scenario, this could mean that Tsuchimikado has been using Toma since the day they met, slowly preparing him to be an asset that could be used for the English Spirited Church, Academy City, or for his own personal ambitions we aren't privy to. It's not as if Toma recognizes this, but decides that Tsuchimikado is too valuable of an ally to completely do away with, so instead, he agrees to work together with him, with the understanding that he could be betrayed at any moment. Nor does the story go in the direction of having Toma acknowledge, despite all the reasons he shouldn't trust Tsuchimikado, the one thing he can say for certain is that their friendship was never a lie. He just carries on as he did before. It's not as if the story needs to be explicit with either mindset. Simply having him ask Kanzaki, or more specifically subtly indicate to her that he wants her to confirm everything he claims is true, which show the former, and having a scene where Tsuchimikado claims that he's a self-serving agent who works for whoever he feels benefits him in the moment, Toma remark that calls back to one of their previous interactions, showing that despite everything he's learned, he still sees him as his friend. Going over this made me realize the lack of suspicion Toma has when it comes to every person he's interacted with post losing his memories. I can only think of one other character who has such an unhealthy lack of skepticism when it comes to strange people asking him for questionable favors. But at least in their case, I can chalk up Ivete to their relatively comfortable childhood and not really needing to be wary of anyone really when it came to their motivations and potential hidden natures.
For Toma, he lives with a strange girl, is occasionally called upon by odd individuals who seek to use powers he doesn't quite understand. I'm not saying he should accuse everyone who talks to him of being a two-faced liar. At the same time, there is room for doubts when it comes to how well he did know these people before he lost his memories. Just have to put it right between people throwing fire at him and people throwing lightning at him. See? Fits like a glove. I also find it queer that people keep asking him questions concerning religion and mysticism when those same people should already know that he has surface level knowledge when he comes to those topics. I'll even lower my request to him simply being able to quickly comprehend that his father, who is constantly surprised by all the weird supernatural situations occurring around him, clearly isn't playing dumb and likely has no idea how exactly the spell he casted came to be. All of what I just rambled on about comes at the cost of exploring the relationship between Toma and his father for this storyline. Of course, the former having amnesia makes the affection coming from these two feel particularly one-sided. The fact that he doesn't properly remember who his father was makes it that much harder for him to defend his dad when it comes to the accusations thrown his way. His amnesia also works to turn this arc into, a subtle allegory for kids who've moved away from their parents before they've fully become adults, and only see them months, if not years apart. Moments and mementos that mean a lot to the parents very well could not have the same meaning for the child. There's a sense of unease with the kids not being sure if they can really connect with their parents as they once did. Learning new information when it comes to mom, dad, or guardian could make them question if they ever really knew him in the first place. But really the reverse could be true, as the kid chooses to reveal their own feelings regarding topics and their parents never really had a chance to talk about before. The most important thing you can do for your family is be there for them when they need you, and take every opportunity to get to know them better. Speaking of getting to know someone better, that's not really an opportunity that's given for a new character for this arc. She mostly just stands silently in the background, only acting when she feels as if she's found the caster for the spell. At best, you can say that shows her to be someone who's dedicated to her job and quick to action, but even that comes into question once it's revealed she was actually the angel that fell in the first place, Gabriel.
raising the question if anything we saw of her personality was genuine or just a poor attempt to mimic sincere human emotions. Ultimately, this is an arc with an interesting concept that's hindered by uninteresting execution of the revelations presented in these 3 episodes. Some may likely enjoy it, but there's a good reason to see it as one of the weaker arcs so far. Also, they show Hinagami with a much more interesting personality, so really this arc was a mistake that should be quickly forgotten. So they're like full-blown story arcs, and more so set up for a future storyline. The first one given being Makoto strong-arming Toma into pretending to be her fake boyfriend in order to ward off a persistent pursuer, only to find out he wasn't after her for the chance of getting a date. It looks like I was presumptuous to praise the series for not adding a romantic element to her relationship with Toma. Thankfully, the writer weaves this into her already established character with all the grace and subtlety of a brick to the face. It also doesn't help that her stated reason for not just telling the guy no is that he's the grandson of her school's superintendent, which, if you stop and think about it for even 5 seconds, should tell you that if he's the type of person to use his grandfather's position to get her to go out with him, he likely isn't going to care that she has a boyfriend. And if he has enough integrity not to do that, then she can just be honest with the guy and tell him no. All of this becomes even more of a joke when it's revealed that the persistent admirer was actually a spy working for a different magical organization who's concerned over the allies Toma is slowly accumulating. You would think someone whose job it is to blend in with the average student of Academy City would be able to come up with a better cover story once the alias they have begins to unravel. But then again, maybe his research taught him that Toma's the type of person who isn't able to figure this type of secret out until 15 minutes after the fact. All of this comes with the idea that we could have instead had an episode, maybe multiple, about the different characters we've seen Toma interact with be followed or hunted down by the various members of this new organization. You can even still have the episode focus on Makoto as she takes down one of the spies and starts to realize that there are more bizarre individuals in the world beyond the denizens of Academy City. But I guess making this a romantic comedy first and foremost was the top priority, and that only serves to benefit the series in the long run. Our next brief adventure sees the focus shift away from Toma and towards Accelerator as he's dealing with the aftermath concerning the fight with the former in the 3rd arc of the series. He soon finds himself having to deal with a unique clone of Makoto that goes by the moniker of Last Order. As he learns more about her and the type of trouble she's in, he soon begins to recognize parts of himself he's long ignored. The arc starts, after the recap, with Accelerator being attacked by a group of low-level espers who believe they have a chance at winning after hearing about his loss to a level 0. This is a decent way to show that his fight with Toma did have effects beyond the intended consequences stated during Accelerator's debut. It does raise the question as to why Makoto isn't being accosted by various upstarts, but that could be rationalized away by assuming her and Toma went to mild lengths to keep their encounters under wraps, as well as the fact that we don't see Makoto that often, so far we know she is going through a similar struggle, just off screen. While it is a bit formulaic to have Accelerator's change of heart stem from a desire to protect an innocent child, the girl in question is connected to the experiment, so within the confines of the series, it can be seen as him changing his outlook on the world upon getting more context in relation to one of the most important situations he's found himself in, rather than simply emotionally connecting with somebody and wishing to see them happy. Going back to said kid, Last Order follows in Index's footsteps by being a precious little repository for information. Although in this case she's less a walking library and more of a miniature control hub for the rest of her sisters. Unlike Index, she doesn't really have those moments of grace I greatly appreciated during the first 6 episodes, yet at the same time, given Last Order's physical and probable chronological age, that can be accepted without too much of an issue. It also helps that Accelerator treats her like a little kid, as opposed to Toma, who ranges from Miss Librorium's servant to her guardian. We also learn Academy City's child safety regulations are not just exclusive to the scientists, as a waitress hands over Last Order to a particular scientist simply because he claims to be a relative. No asking for ID or attempting to wake her up to see if she recognizes him, just, hey, I'm her family, give me the kid. Then again, maybe the waitress was 15 minutes away from her break and figured it wasn't going to be her responsibility, regardless of what happens. I'm also left wondering why it took the scientist what appears to be a day and a half to find Last Order again, since he seemed to be one of the minds tied to the project involving the clones. Yet, unlike my question when it came to Index escaping her pursuers, the series does give a possible answer in the form of another scientist who seems far more reluctant to go along with the mistreatment of the clones and even wants to help Accelerator when it comes to Last Order well-being. She does play around with the trope normally associated with a character such as herself by not initially appearing as an implicit maternal figure who is used to dull out exposition. Instead, she's written as a amicable figure who starts off with the exposition, but over the course of the arc does grow to care about the two, Accelerator and Last Order. A revelation that feels thematically appropriate with Accelerator's journey throughout these 2 episodes. How she goes about conveying this is probably the most awkward and stilted way a character has expressed their feelings. And unless further context is given down the line to explain why she talks like someone who's fully aware they're in a fictional setting, I'm going to assume it was a misguided attempt to create the same emotional impact that would likely be felt from this scene. Even then, the way Toma gave the speech still came across as a bit too artificial, but could be seen as appropriate given who he was talking to at the time. Also, given the length of her monologue, I'm surprised the scientist she was talking to didn't go, "I get it. Just shut up and let me die already." That ties back into what could be considered a focal point of this entire storyline. Why exactly does Accelerator have white hair? Personally, I felt like that was a question that didn't really need to be answered, given the variety of strange hair colors throughout this series, but one is still given by Accelerator, so congratulations for all 50 people who wondered that. So instead I'll focus on the secondary crux of this arc, which would be Accelerator's moral compass. As I already brought up before, this story does use a familiar trope of an antisocial character learning to care about others through their relationship with an innocent youth. But how the series goes about portraying this makes it seem as if it's unsure where exactly Accelerator is supposed to be coming from. Either being someone who is legitimately monstrous, but when shown down a better path, he's willing to walk towards it, regardless of how slow and arduous that may be, or he's someone who comes across as a deranged killer initially, but that was solely because of the context in which we found him in, and when removed from that, we find that he has far more depth than others may have initially assumed, both in and out of universe. If it's supposed to be the former, then the story would benefit from having a stage in their relationship where Accelerator justifies taking care of her, with reasoning that would fit within his old worldview, even if it's clearly derived from a newfound sense of compassion he feels towards this runaway incubaby. If it's supposed to be the latter, then the story needed to do more to remove all the outside factors that defined Accelerator in his debut, since, as it's presented, the only thing that's different from that point in time, when compared to now, is that he's no longer involved in the experiment. As for motives, he doesn't exactly give one till near the end of the arc, and by then it's the point I've likely beaten so hard it looks like a dead Makoto. In the meantime, what we get is Last Order giving a rundown of not only his current mindset, but what he was likely thinking when he was killing her sisters. Which is both a bit on the nose and doesn't carry the same ethos as getting to see Accelerator visually change as a person. While this arc has interesting concepts and fine execution, I can't help but still feel as if it's risk-averse. Not wanting to really recontextualize Accelerator to avoid the possibility of losing fans who enjoyed him as he was during his initial appearance, but also downplaying some of his nastier quirks, so that if you weren't initially sold on his character, you do have a greater possibility of enjoying him now. All 3 episodes do affect the series in notable ways, but if I'm being honest, which I normally am, way ad can be understood without having to necessarily see the episodes that introduce them. I wouldn't go so far as to say you should skip them, but at the same time, I hesitate to call them necessary viewings. With school starting back up for Toma, Index finds she'll have to start making her own meals. Naturally, this leads to her heading to a school, hoping to be fed with affection and riddles. After that goes about as well as you expect, she meets another student and makes friends with her, with the 3 of them spending time together after school. Said time is cut short, however, thanks to a rogue magician who infiltrates Academy City, whose actions act as a prelude to a much greater conflict. It's odd that Toma and Makoto are heading to school at around the same time, given the fact that she goes to a middle school for the elite. But hey, if this scene didn't exist, we wouldn't have more time spent with her getting flustered over interacting with him. Moving on from the students to the teachers, Toma's childlike teacher gives us more information in regards to espers. The way it's delivered, it doesn't feel like it's information only being given for the audience's sake, but also being quick and to the point. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Himegami's exposition she gives to Toma later down the line, with that info dump being dangerously close to repeating information characters should already know. It's also an odd choice to have Himegami deliver that information instead of Toma's spy friend, given he would have more of an incentive to warn Toma of any potential suspicious behavior. Looking at Index's new friendship, I will say that it's not handled in a way to where it comes across as rushed or too artificial. The circumstances surrounding their meeting is a different story, given Index was able to enter both Toma's school, let alone his classroom, before anyone actually tried stopping him. Stranger still, she actually has a point when Toma tells her that she should be well aware of how his school schedule works. Thankfully, Index's character goes back to being consistent, as she later holds two bizarre stances after this conversation. The first being a question of whether or not Toma still likes her, being brought on by his reactions towards her ever since she entered his school, despite being fully aware of the context behind each of his reactions. On one hand, she doesn't have all the details in relation to why exactly what she's doing is odd behavior. On the other, she's never been characterized as unobservant or emotionally unintelligent, so it shouldn't really take her long to figure out why he's been acting irritated towards her beyond them interacting in the first place. The second absurd stance is the belief that she needs to protect Toma from the magician who's entered Academy City. Keep in mind, the only magical threat we've seen her deal with so far are the two magicians who she's been running away from at the start of the series. Meanwhile, from her perspective, Toma was able to deal with them even if he didn't exit that conflict without being nicked and bruised here and there. To give her some credit, she does show the capacity to defend herself from magic using specific phrases. Why she can do that without mana, but needs it to perform spells themselves, isn't really directly answered. Despite that, she still ends up nearly getting killed, so I don't know where this self-assurance in her ability is coming from. It would be one thing if she simply wanted to stay by his side and make sure he doesn't get killed, but instead she acts like she's been protecting him all this time and he can't defend himself whatsoever. There is a level of sense to her nonsense if you look at it from the perspective of everything she's experienced to put herself on. She's been in situations where she's been knocked unconscious without really knowing why, Toma attacking her out of nowhere, despite attacking their roommate being her designated hobby, him constantly ending up in the hospital with him never really elaborating as to why.
Do I need a reason to want to help out a friend?
And her butler dad crush constantly running off to get involved in conflicts she knows nothing about. From that viewpoint, it makes total sense why she would foolishly try to overcompensate for her abilities in an attempt to make Toma realize how valuable she is in the hopes of maintaining their friendship. The quagmire comes in the fact that how she was acting at the beginning of the arc isn't notably different from how she was acting at the end of it, or through the season as a whole. Instead, it seems more likely like that this was done to set up Hyoka giving her perspective on what it means to be friends, and to eventually lead into a brief comedy scene. The worst of it being, I can't really decide if this is all bad or just weird. For something easier to define, it is interesting to see the wall between science and magic begin to form cracks within it. Also, Makoto gets involved through the convenience of her being there when her friend was getting nearly crushed to death. It's not a contradiction or even highly unlikely. I just find it strange that the series that would bother explaining hair color would use the "good thing I was here just in the nick of time" cliche. The next brief talking point is Anti-Skill, who serves as the non-powered law enforcement within the city. They either have incredibly bad salaries or generously flexible hours, given the fact that one of them works as a teacher at Thomas High School. Given the fact that she approaches a rock golem without a helmet, I'm going to lean towards the former. Said stone behemoth being created by the rogue magician who's looking to start a war, or at least sow the seeds for one. Also, she's a part of the English Puritan Church, maybe? Honestly, this detail is superfluous, but if I didn't bring it up, someone else was going to, so there you go. She's hoping to start this conflict by killing either Toma, Index, or Hyoka. Possibly other residents of Academy City, but that's not something we really get to see much of. Her motivation being she doesn't believe that people from either side can coexist together without one of them suffering, thanks to her own experience with her friend who was an Esper. I'd say in that case, it's not the best idea to announce you want to start a war, since the English Puritan Church, or really any group, wouldn't overtly announce that is their intention in such a fashion, which would lead Academy City to take pause in regards to how exactly they should react to her assault. That lapse in logic is less of an issue than her stated motivation in the first place. The reason she gives is that she lost her friend and doesn't want to see that occur again with other people. So her actions are to kill some kids who are friends. Obviously, most antagonists are meant to have flawed perspectives when it comes to the actions they take, and there has even been compelling villains that have pretty weak justifications for their life of criminality. The issue is that the story doesn't treat her as some comic villains who use any perceived slight to lash out at others. Instead, it treats her as someone who's misguided and potentially even wants someone else to stop her. The result is someone who feels like a lackluster compromise between Index's Guardians and Accelerator, wherein she lacks the complex motivation behind her act of antagonism, yet she's also not allowed to be an entertaining figure, as the story wants to treat her grievances as ones worth listening to, even if they can be promptly broken down as to being in the wrong. It can also be said that this ties back to Hyoka's revelation about her true identity, as she finds that her existence directly ties into the other Espers within Academy City. I'd say this naturally gives her an existential crisis in regards to what she exactly is, but given how the series normally handles this topic, her being more subdued would be the more natural reaction. Jokes aside, it does serve as a good microcosm towards the question of whether or not beings of science and magic can even be friends, as Index herself has gone through an experience that could be seen as dehumanizing, and could have very well left her feeling like she is some sort of monster. Yet she pushes past that state of being and instead chooses to make friends whenever she can, setting the precedent that Hyoka could do the same for herself. What lessens the impact is the fact that instead of giving us a handful of episodes to spend time with Hyoka and bond with her as the other characters do, which would in turn make the revelation of what she really is feel horrifying to people in and outside of the show, she's instead given 4 episodes to wrap up this particular section of her storyline. So while the character's feelings towards her feels relatively believable, as an audience member, you care less because you spent time getting to know and attach yourself to Hyoka, and more because of the more broader beliefs about the value of life and what truly defines a person as human. Or maybe you just thought she was really cute, and this type of personality really endears you towards characters such as herself. I don't know, man. Or woman. Hypothetical viewer. I'm not really casting any judgments on you or your taste. As for Toma, he cares all about this because, as we already established, he's a nice guy like that. Maybe because, as well, artificial humans seem to be a sore spot for him. The situation ends well for most characters involved, closing out the season with gags, foreshadowing, and introduction to new characters, such as the leader of the English Puritan Church, Pretty and Palpatine. I like to call her Pip. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the series, you might say that nickname is inappropriate. For those of you who are uninitiated, you might even say that's a spoiler. As for me, someone who absolutely, positively, pinky swears only discovered this series last year, I'm covering all 3 seasons. I was going to have to touch upon her personality at some point. Add on to that is the fact that she turned a kid into a library and lied to her friends about the reasoning behind that, going so far as to place this deadly spell inside her just to maintain the farce. I'm not really giving away much by hinting at her being an unpleasant person. Ultimately, this storyline can be summarized with one word: underwhelming. Not unnecessarily boring, but a situation where the concepts could have used more time dedicated to them, be it both screen time or just how long it took the writers to craft this particular story. As for it being a season finale, it comes across as rather lackluster, giving everything we've been through so far and most of the major characters' involvement, namely how most of them weren't involved. The season as a whole gives a good outline for the characters and the world we'll be existing in as we follow them, but leaves enough to be developed later down the line for any particularly future seasons. As I've repeated throughout, the interesting way the series was introduced in the first storyline isn't exactly repeated in the following arcs. Yet, if you don't look at it from the perspective of a writer, you'll likely enjoy most of what the season has to offer. Both for the auspicious and the ill, this season demonstrates the storytelling opportunities the series has as a whole.